One, the United Nations Capital Development Fund has released a report on making digital work in Uganda by applying a market systems development approach. To help us understand this and more, we are joined by Ronald Rachigumba. He is the digital financial inclusion expert working with the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and he joins me via Zoom. A very good afternoon, Ronald Rachigumba. How are you doing this beautiful afternoon?
Great, thank you, Romeo. Thank you for having me here. How are you?
All right, I'm doing great. Tell us about this new report about using market systems development approach to build inclusive economies. What exactly do you mean when you say that?
Thank you, Romeo. Indeed, we couldn't ignore the timing, considering with the lockdown and the question of how do farmers, access different services. And I think the role of digital is quite timely. So essentially, while launching today's report, some of the themes that did come through from the audience was how then do you deal with the digital divide in the community, where some communities may not have the basic services to access different services digitally. But overall, Romeo, the report does shed a light around not necessarily putting digital before the needs of the farmers, but actually working backwards, starting with what are the main constraints. Is it access to extension services? Is it access to quality agriculture inputs? Is it access to markets? And then based on that, working with the private sector to provide appropriate digital services for these communities.
Well, when you were carrying out this inception study, Ronald, what did you discover in your target sectors?
So when we were conducting this study, we discovered that there was different layers of challenges if you are to provide services to the needs that they need. And we looked at agriculture, we looked at health, we looked at education. And what we did discover was that when you finish the basic foundation of identifying, for example, the need is access to a health worker, then there is, if you're to use digital services to address those solutions, there were additional constraints you had to deal with, which included connectivity, access to devices, and also access to appropriate digital solutions. So at UNCDF, we've kind of stretched ourselves to say, okay, if we're going to crack the challenge of someone needing to know how deep to plant their seed and how to do the spacing, then if you want to provide that service via mobile phone, then you also need to work with telecom operators, work with digital service providers to have a holistic kind of product. And so for today, we also did have representation from the government who are also making sure that they extend bandwidth and connectivity in rural areas.
Mr. Rachigumba, you couldn't be more spot on with your submission, but what are some of those constraints that you discovered in your study?
Yeah, so in agriculture, one of the big constraints was access to markets. And this is a very nuanced challenge, Romeo, whereby on the trader side, they're looking for the product, and on the farmer side, they're looking for someone to buy their produce. So there was that kind of break in communication between those who produce these products and the traders who would like to purchase them. There was also a challenge around access to quality inputs. We all know that there are challenges around quality inputs and the supply chain of those seeds, fertilizers, agrochemicals. So we did see that was a barrier. But the biggest pronounced barrier, Romeo, is really the access to an extension worker. So we know in Uganda currently, even by government statistics, one extension worker serves between 1,800 to 2,000 farmers. And we know that in a 12 or 8-hour day, that's not viable. So we did identify those kind of challenges in the agriculture sector. In the health, we did find the issue of, you've heard about expired drugs and issues like that. So the challenge is more around how do you ensure that there is monitoring of the supply chain of drugs up to the lowest health center. And then, of course, we did find, similar to agriculture, we did find access to a community health worker was also a challenge. And in education,
To
Yes,
go,
Romeo.
Ronald Rachigumba. Let's talk about the recommendations within this report. What kind of resolutions have been highlighted to help us build digital inclusive economies, Mr. Rachigumba?
Thank you very much, Romeo. So one of the recommendations is the value of using a market systems development approach. And the benefit of that is that you don't solve a problem repeatedly. So when you identify what, for example, what is failing the supply of inputs in the market, and then you work with the input dealers, you work with all the stakeholders necessary, then in that way, you become irrelevant as a development actor, that in 2 years, that the system can work even without your intervention. And I think that's the biggest kind of recommendation, to expand, to have more players come and use a market systems development approach so that its more solutions are more sustainable. And the maybe other critical recommendation is really to crowd in many actors, that you can't do it alone, even as the UN Capital Development Fund, that you need to make sure that you're aligned to the National Development Plan 3, that you're also working with the innovators and you're making sure they understand the challenge, or what people call the human-centered design. So having all those different actors kind of also is very critical, Romeo, to have this succeed.
He is the digital financial inclusion expert at the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Thank you very much, Ronald Rachigumba, for having made the time to speak to us.
Thank you, Romeo. Thank you very much.